Hello, my name is Michael Jones, and in this presentation, we're going to be talking about the topic of multiculturalism, but we're going to do it from just a little bit different perspective. What I want to focus specifically on in this presentation is looking at the topic of privilege and microaggressions in mental health counseling. Now, for many of you in this course, this may be your first class you've taken at Messiah, and so if that's the case, then this will be some good information for you to help you to get a good overview of privilege and microaggressions as we talk about multiculturalism. For those of you who may have already taken the multicultural counseling class, this will add some different information to that you may not have picked up in that course. But I hope these two things together will help you to get a better understanding of how do we deal with our clients that we're working with or our future clients and do it from a multicultural lens. And so I hope this will be beneficial to you. So as we go through this presentation today, there are a few things that we want to consider. So these are the 4 questions I want you to consider as we are going through this presentation. Number 1, I want you to consider what is the racial, ethnic, and cultural makeup of your current caseload. I want you to kind of put that in your mind, especially if you're currently seeing clients right now. And if you're not seeing clients right now, I want you to think about the area that you are living in and also the area you could potentially be working in, and be thinking once again about the racial, ethnic, and cultural makeup of those individuals, especially if they're on your caseload. The reason why I want us to start this way is because I don't want us to merely look at this as an academic exercise of, okay, we're going to talk about multiculturalism, let's get through this as quick as possible. I want you to see people's faces in your head as we talk about this topic, because when we do that, I think the better off we'll be at the end of this presentation. So we want to think about that aspect at the beginning. Also, we want to think about, does your counseling methodology connect with the clients on your caseload that you have? And the reason why I ask that question is there are so many different theoretical orientations you can be a part of. You could practice DBT, you could practice CBT, you could practice from a humanistic perspective. There's so many different perspectives you can practice from. And none of those are bad perspectives to work from. The question is, you have to start beginning to think about is, how does that methodology connect with the clients you're working with? Because the reality of it is, not all theoretical approaches work with all clients. And so if you're using a methodology that doesn't work with the clients that you are working with, then the next question to kind of naturally come off of this one will be, why are you still using that methodology? And so we want to be considering that as we're working through this presentation today. And also we want to ask the third question is, have you thought about how your own growth and development influences your counseling methods? So from a cultural perspective, from a racial perspective, from a gendered perspective, how does that influence how you go about doing counseling? And the reason why I ask this question is because these things do take effect. Me as an African American male who is a cisgendered male, because of that, that's going to affect the way I do counseling. And so you need to think about where you are as an individual and how does it affect the way you go about doing the counseling that you do. So be thinking about that through this presentation as well. Also, have you come to terms with your own racial, cultural, and ethnic and gender identity? This is an important thing to think about as well. There's this thing called racial identity development model that each one of us process through. And so because of that, everyone's at a different stage when it comes to their racial identity development. So my question is this for you. Have you come to terms with that? Are you at a place where you feel comfortable talking about race and talking about gender and talking about culture and gender identity, things of that nature? And if you're not at that point where you're comfortable talking about it, the question then becomes why you're not comfortable yet. And so we want to work through that as well as we go through this presentation today. So for the presentation overview, there are 3 main things we want to do as a part of this presentation. The first thing we want to talk about is just implementation. So part of this is going to be a self-awareness exercise I want each of you to do, and so we'll go through that here at the beginning. After you go through that self-awareness exercise, we want to talk about this awareness in general on some reasons for being a multicultural competent counselor. That this is a journey that we're all on, that we're working towards, but in order for that to happen, we need to figure out why we're on this journey in the first place. And then we want to talk about advocacy, to learn how to become an advocate for those who experience racism or oppression. And once we finish these three main topics, then we will be finished with this presentation. Now, so this is an exercise that's called the circles of my multicultural self. And so what I want us to do, and I'm going to explain how I did mine first, and then once I explain mine, I'm going to get you to pause this video, and I want you to take about 10 minutes to do this as well. And what I did here is I put my name right in the middle. And so in the middle of this whole thing is me, and my name is Michael. So I'm right there in the middle of this circle. But branching out from the circle, there are many different aspects of who I am as a person. And so one aspect of me is that I'm a husband. That's important to me. And so I've got being a husband as one of the bubbles outside of my multicultural self. Also, I'm in the middle class. That's something that I've worked very hard to get there, and so because of that, that's an important part of who I am as a person that affects the way in which I interact with other people. I'm also African American, and so because of that, that does help shape the lens in which I see things in life. I'm also a man, and so because of me being a man, that also shapes the way in which I look at life when I come in contact with people. I'm also a counseling professor, and so because I'm a counseling professor, I do approach life a little bit different. That is a part of my lens that I have as I begin to look at different topics. I'm also a counselor, and that's important to me. And so because I'm a counselor, once again, that affects the way in which I look at this world. On top of this, I am a Christian, and being a Christian is an important part of who I am as a person, which in turn affects everything else in this circle as well. So I felt that was an important part of me as well. Also, I'm a son, and so being a son, that is a part of who I am as a person, and once again, that affects who I am and affects other parts of me too. Also, I'm a brother, and I'm a father. And that's to me, those are two important parts of who me as a person, especially when we talk about me being a father. I love that part. And so as you see all these different things, husband, father, brother, son, Christian, counselor, all these different aspects of me, all of these things together, the intersection of all these things together makes up the picture of who Michael Jones is. And so these things are important. So what I would like for you to do at this point is I want you to pause the video, and I want you to get out a piece of paper, and I want you to put a circle right there in the middle. And once you put the circle in the middle, I want you to write your name in that circle. And once you end up doing that, I want you to write down 10 things, a minimum of 10 things that are in these outside circles that define who you are as a person. These are things that are important about you, and these things also shape how you view the world. And so your 10 things don't need to necessarily match up with mine, but I want you to at least take a minute to do this. So at this point, go ahead and pause the video now. Take about 5 to 10 minutes to do this assignment, and then come back and we'll continue with this lecture. So, like I said, what you did in that assignment, you wrote your name in the center of that circle. You thought for a moment about the different identities that make up who you are. You ranked them in your head on a piece of paper from what's most important in your life. And then you put those things that are really the most important things about you in that circle. And that gives you a better picture of who you are as a person. And I hope that will help you to see why you look at things the way that you do as you look at that circle. Because the reason why I wanted us to do this exercise is that many times we sometimes look at life from a perspective of, well, I just look at life this way because of A, or I look at life because of B, or because of like one or two different things. But the reality is we have so many different influences that affect who we are. All these together affect me, and because all these affect me, these are the things that shape the way I look at life and how I make decisions and how I work with other people. So it's important for you to understand this circle as we continue with this presentation. Now, for a second part of this exercise, what I want you to do is to look at what stereotypes do not fit your multicultural self. And so, as you look at those 10 different things that you wrote about yourself in a circle, I want you to take one of those things and I take it back. I want you to look at all of those things that you have on there, and you'll pause this video again. And I want you to write out a sentence for each one of these. So you'll say, I am a blank. So for one is, I am a father, but that does not mean blank. So, for example, if I was using me being middle class is one of mine. So, I am a middle class person. So, what's some stereotypes with that? I need to think about those. But that doesn't mean that I'm rude to those who are not in the same socioeconomic status as I'm in. And so think about the stereotypes that are connected to those different parts of your multicultural self. And I want you to, once again, write a sentence out for each one of those and to think about that for a couple minutes. So once again, pause this video for about 5 to 10 minutes and do this exercise. And once again, use the different things from your circle, your multicultural self, and put what you are. Think of a stereotype and help me to see, even though you may feel this one thing out, that does not mean that you are this other thing. So do that as a part of this exercise. Now, we've done these two exercises now. We've looked at our circle of multicultural self. We've also looked at some of the stereotypes as well that goes along with that. And the reason why we want to do that is because the reality of it is when you come in contact with other people, you know that all these different things shape who you are as a person, but sometimes people will take one of those things and they'll use that as as one tool to judge who you are as a person. And so for me, I don't want you to be in a position where you're feeling judged, because the reality of it is you don't need to be judged based on just one aspect of you, because there's many aspects of you that are super important. And the flip side of that is when it comes to our clients, we also don't want to judge them based on one aspect of them. We want to look at them as a whole person, even though each one of those aspects shape how they look at life and also how you look at life as well. So the question we want to now answer is, why be multiculturally competent? And I want to give you 5 different reasons why we want to be multiculturally competent. First of all, it is ethically mandated. When we look at our code of ethics, it helps us to see that whenever we want to work with different populations of people, our code says that we need to learn how to do that. And it's important that we do that. And so our ethical codes tell us that we need to be multiculturally competent. That I can't just refer someone out because they're different from me. It's not that simple. You need to be able to work with people who are different from you, because it's a good way for you to learn some things. And so our code of ethics tells us that we're ethically mandated to be multiculturally competent. Also, when it comes to case conceptualization, whenever we begin to work on cases and we begin to think about why our clients are dealing with certain issues in our life, if we're not multiculturally competent, it's very easy for us to let our own bias step in, and we make decisions based on our bias versus looking at this person from a multicultural perspective. And so it's important for us to make sure that we look at every aspect of a person before we begin to conceptualize their case, before we start looking at diagnosis, before we start doing anything with these clients. We try to see what are the different parts of this person that they are. And the more that we do that, the better I think we will become as therapists when we look at the whole picture of who someone is. But so all too often we get focused in on one aspect, and because of that, it messes up our ability to do a good case conceptualization of that client, because our biases have moved in to there. The third thing we want to look at is the counselor-client relationship. And the reason why I put this here is because if you're not multiculturally competent, it's going to be hard for you to be able to have a good relationship with your clients. There have been times where I have worked with clients before, and if I did not know much about their background and culture, and if I tried to, as some people say, fake it until I made it, it wouldn't help, because I couldn't build a good relationship with them. But when I'm multiculturally competent, I learn how to bridge the gap between people because I start looking at their wheel. I look at their multicultural self. And I begin to connect those. So maybe as I look at my wheel, I notice that, hey, this person coming in is a father. I'm also a father. That helps me to build a bridge there. This person may be a Christian and I'm a Christian, and so I build a bridge. Maybe this person's a counselor and I'm a counselor, and it builds a bridge. But I begin to look at all the things that we have in common with each other and use that to help myself to see that this is how I bridge those gaps together with my clients so I can have that good counselor-client relationship. So it's important for us to do that. Another thing we want to look at is the client retention. One thing I've noticed with newer clients or with newer therapists sometimes is they will have clients who are from different backgrounds from them, and it may not even be a racial thing. It could be something as simple as socioeconomic status. And they begin to see that every time certain groups of people from that socioeconomic group come in and they work with that client, they're not able to keep clients coming in, and they're wondering why they're struggling. And when the one thing that will come up is they may say, well, it's just the client's fault. Well, if you begin to notice that a certain group of people always comes to you for therapy, but they don't stay long, it may not be you, it may not be the client's issue, it may actually be your issue. So if I am constantly seeing that people from the LGBT population are coming to me and they're not sticking with me as a counselor, that may mean that I need some more competence in that area. Maybe if I'm working with female clients and they're not staying with me, maybe it means I need some more competence in that area as well. And so client retention plays a big role in this when on being multiculturally competent, that we want to make sure we're able to work with as many different groups of people as possible. But the only way that can happen is if we grow in our multicultural competence. And I also think another really good reason on being multiculturally competent is just as a chance for personal growth. I think the longer I get, the longer I live, and the older I get, and the more experience I have with people who are different from me, the more I grow. And it helps me to be able to work with a multitude of different people. And so I think that's important for you as well as you're looking at this process that we're all going through, is that this is a good chance for personal growth. Because here's the reality. Everybody that walks through our door, well, everybody who is a therapist, who does counseling, we all have biases. That's just the reality of it. We all have some type of bias we step into the counseling office with. Knowing and the reality of it is, if we don't know what those biases are, we can cause damage. So it's important for us to know what our biases are. And sometimes we believe those stereotypes that we just talked about a few minutes ago. So if I walk in with a bias, and if I walk in with a stereotype in my mind, that comes out in a way in which I deal with my clients, and my clients can pick up on that and they don't return. And it's an opportunity for me to grow if I would just take a few minutes to try to see things from their perspective. And so these are just 5 good reasons or helpful reasons to know about being more multiculturally competent. So when we talk about cultural diversity, what are we talking about? And this basically just looks at the spectrum of differences that exist among groups of people with definable and unique cultural backgrounds. And so the reason why I find this important is that we all come from different backgrounds. And once again, as we go back to that wheel we were looking at earlier, it helps us see that we all have some significant differences. And those differences are important. So differences aren't bad. There's nothing wrong with having differences. It's a good thing for us to learn from those differences, but also be able to see, is there a way that I can connect with someone else, even with the differences that I have with them. So it's important for us to realize that these differences that we have help to be a part of the cultural diversity that we're talking about in this presentation. But there are also, when we think about cultural diversity, we also think about counselors who are what we call culturally encapsulated counselors. Let me explain what this looks like. This is a counselor who has tunnel vision. And let me kind of break that down a little bit. This is a counselor who defines reality based on one set of cultural assumptions. And guess what? It usually is their own cultural assumptions. So they look at life based on what they're used to, They look at life based on what they think is right. They look at life based on only the things that's important to them, but then they step into the counseling office and they expect the exact same thing from their clients that they're working with. And so when that happens, it puts blinders on them, and they're not able to see the true problems that are going on with the client because in their mind things are supposed to go a certain way. And so that's one way of saying someone is culturally encapsulated. Also, this counselor shows that they're insensitive to the cultural variations among individuals. So if someone's different from them, they just become very insensitive. They don't look at diversity as a good thing. And so when they see someone that's different from them, they make comments about it, and for them they don't think they're being offensive or whatever the case may be, and that's not helpful. And so they become insensitive to the differences among various cultural groups. Also, they accept unreasoned assumptions without proof or ignores proof because that might disconfirm their own assumptions. So, for example, and this is a controversial one, but I'll say it anyway. When we think about politics, for example, we may say that, well, all Republicans are this way, or all Democrats are that way. And when we have that mindset that way, what happens is, if I have a client that walks in and they come from one of those two perspectives, even though I may believe in my mind that people think the Republicans think of one way and the Democrats only think this way, and if you're a Democrat you act this way and you're a Republican you act this one way, and someone shows me proof that that's not true, I simply just ignore it. Because once again, I have this tunnel vision. I'm not looking to see the whole picture of things. And I know politics is probably not the best way of looking at that, but I think that's one way of us doing that just in general with individuals, is that we sometimes just make the assumption about people and there's no proof to back it up. And even when we're given a proof, we ignore it. And so that's what it means to be culturally encapsulated means. Also, we fail to evaluate others' viewpoints and make little attempt to accommodate the behaviors of others. And this is an important thing for us to think about. Because whenever we're working with a client, and if I don't make any attempt to accommodate for the behavior because it doesn't match what I think they should do, then once again I'm imposing my beliefs and my way of thinking on that client. And so that's a very dangerous place to be in with the client. I don't want them to have to think or to be like me. They need to be able to have their own mindset. They should be able to act in whatever way works best for them. And even though it may not match the way that I think it needs to happen, it doesn't mean it's wrong. So this counselor, they just fail to evaluate the other people's viewpoints. And also when we think about an culturally encapsulated counselor, this person is trapped in one way of thinking, and they resist adaptation, and they reject alternatives. That just means they look at life from one specific way, and they can't see life any different from it at all. And that is dangerous, because when I'm only stuck seeing things from one perspective, and I'm not willing to adapt, and I'm not willing to look at life from any other way at all, that becomes problematic when I have clients sitting in front of me and I'm trying to listen to their life, I'm trying to listen to everything they're going through, but at the end of the day, we begin to realize that we're not really looking at life from their perspective, and so we just basically reject our alternative. We're like, well, that's not the way I look at it, so it can't be true. So as therapists, we need to be willing to adapt. We need to be able to be flexible and to listen to the perspectives of other people. So what are some assumptions that you may hold, and as a therapist or as a growing therapist, when it comes to self-disclosure? What does self-disclosure look like? You may have certain assumptions about that. What about being assertive? For some people, we call it assertive. Other people call that person, they're confrontational. Maybe they're not being confrontational. Maybe that person is just assertive. It's all about the way in which we look at it. What about self-actualization in relationships? How do you view that? You may hold certain assumptions in those areas. And if your client holds a different assumption in those areas, what do you do to work on that? What about nonverbal behavior? Well, maybe, if someone has their arms crossed in a session, maybe that means something different than what you think. But because you're culturally encapsulated, you may not see it that way. What about when someone asks a question? They ask a very direct question, and how you interpret what respect looks like. You may have some assumptions there that your clients may not have. There's other things too. Think about parenting. You may be brought up a certain way, and your client may be brought up a totally different way, and you may be saying, well, you must do parenting this way. Where is that coming from? It's coming from your assumptions. Also, gender roles. Who is supposed to do what certain things at the house? That once again comes from assumptions that you may hold. When it comes to time management, when it comes to confronting your parents and relatives and different things like that, these are the issues your clients come into the counseling office and they're dealing with. And if you are a culturally encapsulated counselor, then you end up holding people to some assumptions that you believe. And the problem with that is that we all have a mind to think. And so we need to make sure that as we are working with clients, we leave room for interpretation, we leave room for explanation, and we leave room for us to grow as therapists. And there's other resistance to multiculturalism. One I hear a lot is that I've got friends syndrome, and this is when someone will basically tell you, "Well, I can't. I'm not a racist. I'm not this or that because I've got friends of whatever the case, and fill in the blank." And the reality of it is that doesn't really make a difference if you have friends of a certain racial group or from a certain sexual orientation group or whatever the case may be. Just because you have friends from there does not necessarily mean that you don't have some forms of resistance to multiculturalism. Or this ideology of being colorblind. When we tell people, I don't see color, well, the reality of it is you do see color. So whenever you say that you don't see color, you're lying to yourself. You do see color. Color is important for us to see. It's important for us to see the differences that we have, and also that we also are able to grow from that and knowing and appreciate the difference that we have in each other. Also, the other people syndrome. This is what we're also talking about with those people. They are always doing this. And the question then becomes, who is this they? Who are these other people you're always talking about? It's important to be able to really define that and get down to the point of and be more specific about the groups you're talking about versus just saying using this collective they. Because when you do that, you end up grouping people together. Or this conspiracy theory syndrome, or this group of people has an agenda, and so because they have an agenda, then I can't work with this group of people. Once again, that becomes a conspiracy theory. Why are you thinking that way? What's keeping you in this position that you are working towards, not working towards not working towards having some relief for this client, or not working towards helping this client to get to the place they need to be because you're so stuck in this conspiracy theory ideology. Or the savior syndrome. This is where we go in and we want to go save certain minority populations. And the reality of it is people are not looking for you to save them. People wanting you to listen to them and to hear their stories and then react from that and then do something about it with them, but not for them. And so that's where that savior syndrome comes in. And also the cultural fatigue syndrome. This is where people just say, why do we keep having to talk about this? Well, the reason why we keep having to talk about this is because we still have problems in our country when it comes to race. We still have problems in our country when it comes to gender. We still have problems in our country when it comes to sexual orientation. And because we have all these problems and we have not dealt with them in the right way, this is why we still have to talk about it. And so when we showed signs of cultural fatigue and we want to say, I'm tired of talking about it, we're basically saying I'm resistant to change. And the reality of it is we don't need to be resistant to change. Another thing we need to think about is just multicultural competence. Just making sure we have more awareness of what we're doing and being more conscious of the things that we're doing as well. Also growing in our knowledge as well of how to work with different groups of people, and also growing in our skills that we have as well. So when it comes to advocacy, there's some things that we can do as counselors to help people and advocate for others. So we might think for although what circumstance of diversity might require a counselor to advocate for a client. So we want to think about that. And so I want you to actually think about that for a minute. You can pause the video if you need to, take a couple of seconds to do that. But think about a circumstance of diversity, what a circumstance of diversity that where it may require you to advocate for a client. Then after you do that, how might this scenario lead to advocacy at the client level, at the agency level, and also at the political or community level as well? Because if we're going to be advocates, if we see there are problems that people are going through and they need an advocate, just knowing the problem itself doesn't fix it. The next thing we need to do is we need to get into some action to advocate. Remember, advocacy is not doing something for somebody, you do it with them, you help them in this process. And so we look at the client level of advocacy. We look at the agency level of advocacy. What can I do as an agency, but also from a community stance, how do I do all of that? And as we go through this whole process, we start to look and see ethically and legally, what are some things I need to consider when I become an advocate? Because I think our ethics do play a process in that role, and also our legal processes play a process in that role as well. But we need to consider all of that as we try to grow, to learn, to become an advocate for individuals. So when we think about culture, we have to remember that culture is multi-layered. It does begin at the individual level. There's individual assumptions that we have, that our clients have. There's values and there's beliefs that are shaped by the family and our social groups. And so because of that, culture starts way down there. There's also culture at a group level. And this is when your membership is based upon your ethnic group, gender, age, your class, your racial group, religion, sexual orientation, or even the region of the country you're from. And those end up, culture is changed by that. I'm someone who has lived the majority of my life in the South. And so being a Southerner is a culture. My wife, she is from, she grew up in the North. And so there's a Northern culture that she had. If somebody can grow up in the Midwest, these are different cultures based on even on region of the country. So we have to think about that as well as we're working with people. Also from societal place as well. And how does culture affect the school place I'm in, or where I work, or the media, or the government? All these things come into play. And so culture is not just something very easy that we can look at and say, oh, culture is skin color. No, culture goes way beyond that. It goes on at the individual, group, and the societal level. Now we want to talk a little bit about privilege. Now, for many people, they hate this word. And the reason why I think people hate the word privilege so much is because they don't understand what privilege is, or where privilege comes from, or even to how to even conceptualize this topic. And so I hope over these next few slides will help you get a better understanding of what privilege really is, so it's not such a bad word. No one has ever asked anyone to apologize for the privilege they have, but what we do ask is, if you have privilege, what are you doing positive with the privilege that you have? So let's talk a little bit about privilege. And so here's a quote that I want to read to you that goes back to privilege. It says, "Differences do not separate us, but refusing to acknowledge them and the role they take in shaping our relationships and institutions keep us apart. We need to rethink difference and use it as a place to reconstruct our world." And I love this quote because because the thing about it is, like I said, differences, the fact that we're different, that doesn't separate us. But when we refuse to acknowledge them, that's where the problem comes in. We refuse to acknowledge it, and so we gotta rethink the way we look at differences. That's how change comes about. That's how we change the world. That's what Audre Lorde said, and I think it's a very good quote for us to kind of begin and to broach this topic. So what exactly is privilege? And so when we use this word privilege, I want to define it this way: that society gives privilege to groups by assigning unearned over advantage to some groups and unearned honor advantage to others. I'm going to read that again. So that society gives privilege to groups by assigning unearned overadvantage to some groups and unearned underadvantage to others. And because of this, what happens is it gives status and powers to members of groups with privilege. And we're going to talk about some of those groups here in a minute. But think about that. Those with privilege, they get status and they get power, but they have not earned that. So let's think about that. They've not earned that. And once again, that has nothing to do with merit or ability. So it's not because you're better or worse or anybody. It has nothing to do with merit or ability, but it is systemic. And that's the thing I think we have to wrap our mind around, that when we think about privilege, it is built into all our systems that we have here in the United States. And so once again, unearned versus unearned advantages and underadvantages. So privilege is similar to a fish being unaware of the water in which it lives. It's in water. It may not even think about it being in water because it's always been there. It's always there. So because I'm always surrounded by this, when someone points out the fact that, hey, someone tells the fish, hey, you're in water, the fish can get upset all day it wants to, but the reality of it is, if the fish is in water, the fish is in water, whether it's unaware of the water or not. And so that's what privilege looks like. So let's look at what some of these different groups who have privilege, and this may actually surprise you. The first one is what we called white privilege. Once again, this is one of those words that is a trigger for some people. This doesn't mean that because you're white, you're a bad person, that you're evil or anything like that. It just means because of your privilege, let's go back to the slide before, you may end up having unearned overadvantage to some groups in your group, and for other groups, they have unearned underadvantage. And so when we think about how our society has shaped beauty, think about that for a second. When we look on the cover of these magazines and things of that nature, there is a picture of what beauty looks like. And that's defined by whoever has privilege, whoever has that. And so when we think about beauty, when we think about the way societal rules that we have that have been created, things of that nature, all those things are created by those who are in power, those who have that privilege. So when we think about privilege, I think about a middle class white American male, because most of our things in our society is built towards that. And so when I look at this topic, when I say white privilege, once again, is unearned over advantage, just because. Now that doesn't mean that someone who is white that they think they're better than other people or they're evil. It doesn't mean anything like that. But there are some certain privileges. For example, there was a study done not too long ago when it came to looking at people's names. And so we had one person who applied for the exact same job, and they had the exact same qualifications on their resume on every single thing, and they sent the same application in two times to all the same employers. But on one application, they used a name that sounded more white, and then on another application, they used a more ethnic name. And the reality was, when they got a phone call for the job interviews, the one where they used the name that sounded more white got more job interviews. I mean, significantly more. When the person used a name that sounded ethnic, did not get called. I can't remember the specific number, but there was a big disparity between the two. But once again, same CV, same resume, same user experience, same companies. The only thing that was different was the name, and because one name sounded more white, privilege that person was called more than another person. So these studies have been done, and so that's where white privilege comes into play. Heterosexual privilege. Let's talk about that a little bit. When I see, I would say traditionally, when we see a man and a woman who are walking down the street and they're holding hands with each other, no one really seems to think another thing about that. Or if I see a man and a woman kiss each other in public, we're not even talking about anything like just a normal peck on the cheek or a kiss or whatever the case. This is a very light kiss. No one ever thinks about that. But if you think about a couple from the LGBT population where they're walking down the street and they're holding hands, they get stares. They still get stares. They still get looks. If any type of public displays of affection is given, those looks are still there. That's heterosexual privilege. Once again, unearned over advantage versus unearned under advantage. Able bodied privilege. The fact that there are certain things I'm able to do because my body works the way or my body works the way in which it was designed. And so because of that, there are certain advantages I have. And we think about, we think about the way buildings are built, things of that nature. Sometimes they're not built and or equipped for people who do not have all the physical capabilities of someone who has a full capability of their body. And so that is an able-bodied privilege that we have every single day if you're able-bodied. And so someone who may not have all those, whose body does not work the way in which it was designed to work, we have to realize things are built differently. And so because of that, there's a privilege we have there. There's also a class privilege that we have based on socioeconomic status. We have privileges based on that. And you're saying, well, how is that possible? Well, I can tell you about even the town that I live in, and we look at that. We look at that throughout the world. That in our country, this is not even like this. We're not talking about hundreds of years ago, but I want you to look up the term redlining sometime. And basically, what redlining is that we saw in the 70s and 80s, and even in the early 90s, that when people were doing planning for cities, they would literally draw a line throughout their city that says people with certain levels of income can live on this side of town, and literally across the tracks, people with this certain level of income lives on this side of tracks. Well, you're saying, well, how do you do that? Well, they did that through real estate agents. So when I'm trying to buy a house, and when someone looks at my how much I make a year, things of that nature, they could basically say, oh, here's a few houses that will work for you. And so based on class, if I didn't fit in the upper class or middle class, even if I could afford to go to those other places, they will still put me in a certain section of town. And we've seen redlining happen for years upon years, and we still see that goes on in certain places. Or when we look at these, when we look at certain neighborhoods in our community where they have those payday cash loans, where they're charging 25% to 50% interest on the loans. Notice what neighborhoods that they are in. They're not in those neighborhoods that are considered high-class neighborhoods. They put them in the neighborhoods that are low socioeconomic status. And there's an issue with that, and that's a class privilege. Also, privilege based on religion. And I know I teach for a faith-based university, have no issue with that whatsoever, but religion is used as a privilege. That sometimes there's a thought process that, well, because I'm a Christian or because I'm a person of faith, then because of that, other people need to react the way that I want them to in certain situations. So I need this person to pray with me at the beginning of the class, or I need this person to read a certain book, or whatever the case may be. But all that privilege is based on religion. And the difference is if someone comes in from a different perspective, maybe they're religion, maybe they're atheist, or maybe there's a different religion that's not a Christian type religion or Christian based religion. Because of that, we end up making laws they're stuck more towards Christian based religion. Just look at our calendar that we go by. That we go by every single year, and the paid days off that we get, most of those are based on a Christian calendar, and that's religious based, and that's a privilege based on religion. Something to think about. Also, privilege based on gender. That's still here in 2020. That women, when it comes to they look at their salaries versus a man's salary, they're still making 69 cents. To the dollar that a man makes for doing the exact same job at the exact same level of education. Is based on privilege. And also privilege based on formal education. I have multiple degrees because of that. That puts me in a different situation. Does it not mean okay? Yes, you may be thinking, well, somebody else can take out a bunch of student loans and do things like that to get where you are or to get where I am. But the reality that's always not always that simple. And so when we have formal education, it puts us in a different place. It gives us privilege. And so there are many different types of privileges that we have. And so we just have to be aware that it's not bad that we have these, but once you know that you have these privileges, what do you do with it so that you can help those people or work with those people who have unearned under advantages? And that's what we think about when we think about privilege. So some people are just in denial. And this is the pressure to avoid that the realization that privilege is great. And the reality is there is a lot of privilege out there. So we need to understand that we have it. We must face it, and we need to just give up the ideology of, when I use the word meritocracy, basically what I'm saying is we have this ideology where everybody should pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Well, here's the thing. What if everybody doesn't have bootstraps to pull themselves up by? We can't just say just work real hard and you can get there. Some people have different advantages than other people, and there's privileges that some people have over others. And because of that, we're not starting the race at the same place. So because of that, we have to realize that. And so this is not such a free country as we try to make it out to be. And our life is not made out to what we think it is and we're in denial to that. And then we also have to realize that many doors are open for certain people through no virtues of their own. We still have a good old boy system of where certain jobs and certain things are given to certain people just because they know certain folks in those things. And that's because of privilege. And the reality of it is that happens on a daily basis. And so we can stay in denial and say it's not happening, but this is what's happening in our country. And because of that, we have to learn on how to advocate for those who don't have those advantages. So, how do you address privilege? Don't assume that all differences are the same, and realize that some differences do have more weight than other differences, and because of that, it can harm people more if we try to ignore those differences they have. Also, we need to acknowledge and validate everyone's experiences, that the stories they have when someone tells you that certain things are going on, whether or not you've experienced those things, you still need to believe those things because they're important. We have to avoid assumptions when we are working with individuals, because when we don't avoid assumptions, we basically are just saying, well, this has to happen because it's just the way I think. I think we also need to listen with compassion when we're talking to people. Listen to what they have to say. Hear their voices as you're working with them, because when you hear their voices and have some compassion, it goes a lot longer, much more distance when you do that. Also, create safety and room for everyone. Everyone needs it. And some people don't like that term, safe space. But what I'm saying is, people need to have the ability to be able to speak their minds from their perspective without someone saying, "Hey, that's not real. That's not true." That's the quickest way to shut somebody down is to invalidate or not give any validity to their story whatsoever. So create safety and room for everyone. And also speak from your experience, not just generalities. So if you've had a bad experience one time with one person from one racial group, speak to that and say that. But don't just say, well, because this one thing happened to me, then all people from this specific group act this certain way. So speak from your experience and not from generalities. Let's talk a little bit about microaggressions. And so basically, microaggressions are just a brief and a commonplace verbal and nonverbal behavioral sayings that people do. And sometimes they're intentional, sometimes they're not intentional, but they basically are derogatory sayings we make towards individuals, and they slight people, and they basically it's basically a way of cutting someone down, even though we don't realize it's having a psychological impact on that person. So sometimes they're subtle. Sometimes they represent some unconscious bias that you have or beliefs that you've grown up with. And sometimes they're more likely to occur when people pretend not to notice difference. So they deny race, they deny sex, they deny sexual orientation, your religion, or ability had anything to do with their actions. And so this is where some of these isms come from that we see when we're dealing with microaggressions. Now, microassaults, let's go back to microaggression just for a second here. So one way, like as me as an African American male, I've been told before, um, you're the whitest black person I've ever met. So my question is, what does that mean? But what they're basically saying is that for them, their standard of what is right and what their standard of what is good is whiteness. And so when I act a certain way, when I act white, whatever that looks like, then I have now reached up to their goal of what normalcy should be. And so now I'm on the same level them because I've denied my blackness in their viewpoint and taken on their whiteness. And so that could be a sample of what a microaggression looks like. A micro assault is when we use biased sentiments to the discriminatory things against individuals when we're talking about them. So we may use racial slurs against certain groups of people or certain populations of people, and we do that, and that is an assault on these individuals. So this is not something that's subtle. We're saying these things because we know that that's going to harm that person when we say that. And so we have to be very careful about these micro assaults because those things happen all the time. And maybe you're not the one who's using it, but if you're hearing people use it, then that's your place as a therapist to step in and say, hey, this is not something that you should be saying. This is not right what you're doing. So that's where micro assaults are. Micro insults, and this is where we once again we look at or demean a person's background and heritage or identity, and we make comments about that. For example, saying black females are less competent and capable. Once again, that's a thought process somebody may have, and because of that, they think that, and they may even verbalize that. And so, when it comes to them hiring a black female, they won't do it because in their mindset, black females are less competent and capable, even though there's no proof for that or to substantiate that. And so, that's where these micro insults come from. And also just micro invalidations. And these are behaviors or verbal comments that exclude, negate, or dismiss the psychological thoughts or feelings of someone. So this person may say, he's a teenager, he's just young, he's just going through a phase. So we just invalidate people's experiences based on age, based on race, based on so many different things. And so we're just basically invalidating their experience. We call those micro invalidations. So some of these counseling implications of this is that clients of color tend to terminate prematurely when they're feeling some of these aggressions happening to them. And so this is why they don't stay in therapy with you, because if they feel that you have something against them, they're not going to say. And also, they're not going to stay. And so the thing about it is these microaggressions may lie at the core of the problem. And so as therapists, we must be credible with what we're saying and with the things that we're doing. And we must be aware of how the words we say can harm other people. And so effective counseling is likely to occur when there's a strong working alliance between me and the client. I'm aware of some of these biases and micro insults and microaggressions I may hold, and I actually deal with them in the right way. And so in this video, we've talked quite a bit about we talked about microaggression, we talked about micro insults, we talked about privilege, we talked about our circles, our multicultural self, and all these things together can be uncomfortable as we're talking about it. But at the end of the day, I hope you realize in order for us to be better as counselors, and if we want to grow, that we have to realize that growth comes through being uncomfortable. You're going to have to put yourself in the shoes of other people. You're going to have to be around people who are different from you. And when you do that if you do that enough times, you're going to be uncomfortable. And I'm glad for that uncomfortable space. But the more you do it, the more comfortable you will be and the more effective you can be as a therapist. I hope this presentation helped you to think a little bit more about multiculturalism. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Hope you all have a great day.